So Todd, let's get started. I'm going to come to you to talk first about some of the industry trends and regulations affecting the business today. Can you get us started, please?
Yeah, Mark, thanks for that introduction. Glad to spend a few minutes more on the macro environment and then double click a little bit in this UMR Phase 6. You hit on a couple, I think, really important points. I mean, the market has been on a long march in the last 10 to 15 years to more collateralization, more exposures. Having collateral is an important counterparty and credit risk mitigant. And this Phase 6 is just an additional step in kind of growing the breadth of parties who are now required to post initial margin, required to collateralize their exposures. We've seen in this Phase 6 some unique attributes. One you mentioned is just a growing number of participants, right? We continue to wrap in more groups that are now required to pledge margin. But unique in maybe in Phase 6 is many of those parties have bring a fair amount of diversity to the ecosystem. And how would I define diversity? The first is there's I think a large dispersion in the amount of sophistication and automation within their firms, both from an operations and from a technology perspective. So some are extremely manual and for the management of collateral, the pledging and receiving collateral, and monitoring and overseeing that process. While others, I think, have a fair amount of sophistication, have been doing this for some time for other exposures. So you really have, I think, a strong diversity in the amount of sophistication of clients that are now being brought into the process. I think that when you look at this next group of firms, it also brings in a diversity in the types of firms that are now part of the ecosystem, with there being more alternative asset managers, more hedge funds, kind of a broader set of companies, just firm size in general, that are now part of that ecosystem. And that creates, I think, a variety of ripple effects. One is a broadening in the required eligible collateral. So certain firms we've seen are allowing far more permissible types of collateral, where maybe in earlier phases you might have seen a heavy emphasis on treasuries and sovereigns. We've certainly seen a broadening of the types of collateral that may be pledged. And then the knock-on effects of that, the agreements have differing agreement terms, eligibility terms, to help mitigate or put controls around that collateral. Remember that the pledging of collateral is at its heart a risk mitigant. And so firms are really trying to ensure in their terms and their agreements that they are including terms that ensure sufficiency. So there's enough collateral to meet that risk obligation. And then the second is that is liquid collateral or liquidatable collateral in the event of default. And so you see a variety of new terms around whether it's exchange traded, rules around the overall liquidity of some of those assets. And so we have seen, again, a growing diversity in the types of clients that are now subject to it, but also the knock-on effects around the collateral pools and the terms at which they will pledge and receive collateral. If I, really zoom out, we've had many client conversations around the impacts of a rising rate environment, and some of the impacts we've seen with volatility in the commodity markets and the equity markets, where firms that maybe were obligated to post collateral were not posting collateral because we've had a flat market or less volatile markets, and now they are actually pledging variation margin quite heavily. So you do see not only the march toward collateralization, but the increase in the velocity of collateral, both from an IM and a VM perspective. And so we've certainly seen firms take a great interest in how do we build some more scalable infrastructure to support this? How do we assure that what's being pledged to us is meets our goals from an eligibility perspective? And how do we get scale in this market with a growing number of participants? So a lot of knock-on effects from this kind of broadening market, and kind of broadening market from an interest rate and commodity perspective. So it's just a very growingly complex ecosystem.